Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to Free Together, Free Apart, Hacking Family Success. You're in the living room of the Vermont Center for Family Studies. I'm Eric Thompson, the Executive Director of the Vermont Center for Family Studies, and we're here to strengthen families. So in my work, especially with high stakes relationship challenges, and especially in family businesses, I'm often challenged to find mental stillness in the middle of intense triangles. Every story is true and false. Everyone wants their story to win. Everyone wants to protect their group from estrangement. This morning, I wrote this to a family business leader. Our family lives are rivers we pretend to control, leading always to an ocean of opportunity to be wise. Among lots of exceptions, are American psychotherapists all too often hostile to family health? It's a question I take seriously. Typically, unintentionally so, but the passion to protect that runs deep in a helper has an eternal flip side: hostility and division. The hero, victim, villain triangle is among us. The famous primatologist Franz de Waal, in Peacemaking Among Primates, suggests that the evolutionary root of aggression is maternal protection of offspring. Whether through an excessive belief in the healing power of expressing emotions in a safe place, or mistaken faith in therapeutic alliance with people angry at the villains that they perceive in their families and lives, helpers are easily fused into the family problem. At the risk of sounding like Harry Potter, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and it needs help amidst the forces of division. Which is why I read and reread Lorna Hecht Zablo, my guest today, 2019 book review of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. I'm just going to quickly share with you a picture of that book and the journal Family Systems, which published Lorna's book review. And many of you know about this journal already. It's new and improved. It's easier to access on the Bowen Center's website, easier to subscribe to. It's a treasure if you want to go deep into a family systems view. So to my ears, Lorna Hecht Zablo's article was like a clear bell of differentiation ringing amidst a cacophony of emotional reactivity in and about Trump. This meeting's not about Trump. It's about something much bigger, longer lasting. Welcome, Lorna. You're muted right now.
Got it. Hello, I'm glad to be here.
Good to have you. Lorna, are you a defender of Donald Trump?
Hardly. And not beyond getting fused into the societal emotional process. But I do maintain another observer self, a bigger view as well.
One thing you mentioned to me when we were preparing for this is that polarization is a polarizing topic.
Yes, yeah, it is. Because what I talked to you about was getting into the terms that are being thrown around all the time now. The societal cliches are whataboutism and both sidesism, and it's very easy anytime somebody is called out, oh, this is what your side is doing. The answer is, well, look at what that side did.
Okay, that's whataboutism.
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 But and also perhaps journalists who are trying to be neutral will often and people that I've listened to say, both sides are equally whatever to blame. And I think in the very broad sense, if one wants to talk about blame on a vast scale, that's true. But it does not mean that all behaviors are equally destructive or irresponsible. When I think about polarization, I think about people clumping and reacting to one another in escalating cycles of reactivity.
Lorna, these are knotty puzzles. And thank you for coming on here and diving in. I want to say I don't expect Lorna or anyone in this call to agree with me during this discussion. I think it might be interesting if we could have an interesting conversation. And as those of you who've been on this show before, you know the plan is about a half an hour of Lorna and I talking, then we'll have a breakout room, which I really hope you'll stay for and practice the art of living your principles in a conversation, maybe even disagree a little in your breakout room. And then after that, we'll have a chance for you to interact with Lorna. I want to do a quick poll here so that we can all kind of get some sense of where our group is. And there's 42 people on the call. Your responses will be anonymous. If you just take a minute to just do this quick 4-question poll, I'll share the results, and that will tee up an interesting discussion, an even more interesting discussion. So I hope you can see the poll. I see a lot of people filling it out, so great.
I do just see 3 questions.
No, thanks. Yeah, just 3. It would help if I could count, Lorna. That's a skill I just haven't got down yet.
Doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt. So we got 83% of people have filled out the poll now. I'm just going to wait another few minutes. Okay, we're up to 88%. So I'm going to end the poll and share it now. Share the results with you. And can you see the results?
Yes.
You can see them? Okay. And I think you can scroll to see the answers to the other questions. So it's interesting. We have 32 out of our group of about 45 who are either Democrat or progressive. And there are 3 conservatives and Republicans among us who have self-identified that way. So as is often the case in any room, there's always more diversity of opinion than most of us realized. And a fairly experienced group with Bowen theory. And a lot of people have not read your book review, Lorna.
Yeah, that number 3 bums me out a little bit.
Yeah, well, there'll be more after this. And here's what I'd like to do right now because of that. I'd like to take 3 minutes to review this article for you. So it's a book review published in the Family System Journal. Again, it's a review of the book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. I'm going to do this quite quickly, so bear with me here. Lorna wrote that the goal of the authors was to muster a collective professional voice of warning about the emergent danger presented by the new president. And I'll just be reading about 4 quotes from Lorna's article along with the one I just shared. She wrote that the book is a flawed messenger for the assertion that Donald Trump is unfit to be president of the United States. It is the thesis of this review that the book is too subjective and fused into an emotional process in society to provide a credible argument about the book's subject, Donald Trump. You might notice as I read these quotes that this is a very well-written book review. She goes on to say that diagnostic terms and categories are riddled throughout the book, including some of these: extreme hedonism, narcissistic personality disorder, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, paranoid sociopath, hypomanic temperament, other blamer, etc. And she writes, she's criticizing the book largely from the angle of a larger critique of diagnosis. She writes that a solid bridge between psychiatry and accepted science has yet to be built. This is largely due to the unstable foundations of the examine, diagnose, and treat model when applied to mental or emotional health. That's a power statement. Since so much research is based on that diagnostic model, the writer is saying this is fundamental and pertains to this provocative book as well. She further writes, it's difficult to read all the labels the authors collectively present without developing the impression that diagnosis is being used as a cudgel rather than a tool to facilitate understanding and healing. Just a few more quotes. She writes that the tone of the book and the content of it, while undoubtedly satisfying to many who oppose Trump, expose the emotional reactivity and togetherness, orientation of the family of the book's authors. And finally, she wrote, it's one thing to think of Donald Trump as a villain or a hero, depraved person, or genius. It's another to consider the entirety of society, including its mental health professionals. From that vantage point, Trump can only be viewed as a man of his time. Those who have taken it upon themselves to diagnose, blame, and mock him from the vantage point of their professional platform are just as caught in a reactive emotional process as the person they are accusing. So Lorna, what do you think of that summary? Did I capture the spirit reading those quotes that I selected?
I think so, yeah.
Huh? Anything you want to add by way of a summary of your review? I missed.
Well, the article touches on several of my, pet interests.
Okay.
The individual diagnostic model and the process in society, and what's going on in politics. I'm very interested in this process and how it's playing out in this country and around the world.
Would you mind sharing a little, how'd you come to that as a practicing marriage and family therapist? Lorna has an active practice in San Diego and is an active blogger and writer and an experienced family therapist. How'd you come to some of those interests from your clinical work? I
think that it flows from Bowen theory and from being interested in Bowen theory. When I was coming up, I had no interest in research or science. Now I did actually marry a person who's very into science. He's a physician and a psychiatrist. So, that led me to get interested in some new things. But Bowen theory and the idea of connecting with the natural sciences and building that bridge and the need to learn more if one wants to speak well to the theory itself and to distinguish it from what else is out there. I think that's where it's come from for me. Yeah.
Where do you see polarization as a universal process appearing in the families you work with?
Well, polarization, I was thinking about this today. A form of it develops in the couple, the marital couple or the primary couple, in the reciprocity, when the patterns get more and more extreme. One of the situations that is important to consider when thinking about both sidism or whataboutism is the reciprocal pattern in a domestic violence family, where one person is being violent to another, and how extreme that can get. That's a form of polarization. And that would be an example of a situation where this one is not responsible for the violent behavior of the other. And only one of them maybe should be arrested, but there's a reciprocal reaction that gets more extreme over time if left unchecked.
You were sharing with me sort of a natural systems perspective on polarization.
I'm really glad you led with that Dewall quote.
Controversial, maternal protection of offspring.
Well,
Powerful.
It is certainly, I believe he comes from an attachment theory perspective, and that would fit with that. But I was wondering how he accounts for aggression among, reptiles and fish. Well, fish can be protective mothers, but animals that drop their eggs and walk away.
Take a crack at it.
I think
take a crack at that. How he addresses that.
Well, yes, I think it's deeper even than protection of mother. That actually a protective mother is a reflection of the bigger issues of the tension between individuality and togetherness and competition for resources. And that's what's underlying all of this. Victoria Harrison speaks to this often, that there's an instinctive awareness, and Dr. Bowen did too, of the finite nature of the resources on this planet, and the lack of new territories to conquer. The human was good at migration, cut off migration, start anew. When tension got too high, that's how we conquered the world, I think, and plus looking for resources. And all those things are at risk now. So anxiety and tension are higher.
You think polarization's higher?
Yes, I do. And I think it's going to continue until there is some shift in how the human is relating to the planet and the environment.
Yeah, so I appreciate, the big picture you're using. By the way, I think Duvall's argument, and it's not just his at all, about this link has to do with the neuroscience of the different types of brains you find on the planet and the structures that relate to aggression, where they appear and where they don't appear. And there's a correlation between that in the degree of maternal behavior, the length of the relationship between maternal and offspring. So interesting. It sounds mother blaming. I don't think it is. Obviously, males are quite aggressive. But
I would assume all that is true.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps putting that at the highest level, and certainly all maternal aggression is, even among intraspecies, is not the same, and it's not the same under different circumstances.
I just read an article that Walter Smith shared with me that he was working on, and it talked about the value of aggression, and that you wouldn't want to live in a world without it. And you bring that sort of neutral challenge, I think, to the book review you wrote. Do you want to try to flesh this out a little more? This last thing I read, those who've taken it upon themselves to mock him are just as caught in the reactive emotional process as the person they're accusing. Could you just say a little more about that?
I also want to, this is a digression, but the book now is a new edition with 37 mental health.
Okay.
Just so you know, the number who have jumped on board have expanded. There's a Twitter account related to this book called Duty to Warn. Bandy Lee, I think, is the one doing the tweets. I'm not sure. She was the driver behind this book and this compilation. And there are tweets where she's calling names to people.
Okay.
I imagine she's decided the situation is serious enough that she's entitled to take the gloves off and go for it.
Okay.
But it's peculiar behavior for a trained mental health professional.
How so?
Under the rubric of this, it's one thing to do it, not better, but it's one thing to do it in your lay capacity, but in your professional capacity, it seems off the mark to me.
Yeah. Let me ask you why. It might seem like an obvious question, but I wouldn't be surprised if many people listening to you, I mean, the book was very popular, would say, no, there's a duty to warn, and it's a professional responsibility.
Well, the duty to warn is pretty narrow. It's about an identifiable imminent threat to an identified target, right? It's not, this guy's a jerk and he might go off and do anything. We don't know. That's not my understanding of Tarasov. I do take their point, however, that there might be an appropriate forum for discussion about fitness for office. But the way they've decided to do it, I think, is really going about as low as could be. There's this interesting paradox of, we're mental health professionals and we're diagnosing people because they are sick and they need to be healed and made well. And then we use these diagnoses all the time to be critical and put people down and blame them. And, I don't think you can have it both ways, but people do all the time. People do.
I laugh with one of my clients, Lorna, who we joke about how hard he tried to convince me that his father was a pathological narcissist.
Right.
That he was so trapped in that relationship as long as he was obsessed with diagnosing the other. And I think you're right that diagnosis has gone haywire, and it's very commonly used to diagnose other family members who people have never met. And I think I'm reading that you're quite passionate about that process.
Maybe a good case of good intentions gone awry, because the idea was to destigmatize emotional problems and put it on the same level as a physical problem. You wouldn't blame someone whatever, for kidney disease, you don't blame them for depression or anxiety, but then it's mutated into this thing that decides whether or not you get paid for treatment. You know, it's been so institutionalized in the society, and contributes, like you just gave a good example of, polarization in families. Because the whole family can decide can agree.
Do you have any thoughts about why this is not good for America as a community, this process of diagnosing public officials, or Trump in specific? What's the downside of that, do you think, for us as a nation?
I'm having a hard time seeing the upside. You know, what was their expectation? That somebody would come and put him in handcuffs because he's a malignant narcissist? You know, what were they going for? How
about help defeat him?
To help defeat him, that it would catch on with the broader public. But what it's actually done is more passionately fuel antipathy toward Trump and the people he represents, and then fuel the antipathy of the people who do align with him and believe that all the other people are looking down on them.
The deplorables.
The deplorables, exactly. So it's just more and more. And if I could, I would like to read this little quote. It's very brief. I came across it out in the New York Times Book Review on Sunday, and I think it really gets at it. This book is called The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth. To support the reality-based community of science and journalism, Rauch, I don't know how he pronounces his name, shows how human understanding and the marketplace of ideas are now endangered by the excesses of both the left via cancel culture and the right via trolling and disinformation campaigns. I think that little quote really got at differentiation of self, societal regression, and polarization right there in those few words. There is truth and reality, and some people are able to hold on to that, varying degrees of that, and then it goes off further and further. And that would be the difficulty between distinguishing thinking from feeling. So the more the polarization is happening, the more feeling there is, the less thinking there is. The more at risk everything is.
I think because of my, years of fascination with Bowen theory and family leadership, and I have been on a mission for years to meet people from both sides of the political spectrum, get to know them, find out what they really think. I love that puzzle, just like I love the puzzle of meeting people in my family who I've never met or who have been spoken ill of. And what's notable to me is that oftentimes you'll hear people at both ends of the spectrum say, when talking about polarization, well, they started it, or they are the polarizers. And, I think there are people, very smart people, credible people who study this, who say, no, that's correct. It started with Newt Gingrich or whatever. And then there's others political scientists, who don't agree with that. But I think from a Bowen theory perspective, to say they are the polarizers is almost it's a beautiful example of a polarizing statement. What do you think of that?
Yes, of course. And taking the example of Newt Gingrich, anyway, he's one dude. How much could he do? So he's tapping into something, or he's offering something that people grab onto.
You say more about this comment, which I think is related to what you just said, man of his times. I thought that was just such an interesting sentence, and I'm going to read it again. Again, I think it's very well written. From that vantage point, Trump can only be viewed as a man of his time.
And there's a quote in there about Barack Obama. Again, another very polarized, subjective statement that he was the epitome of, I don't remember the exact words, wonderfulness.
Presidential character.
Yeah, and that the society had reached the pinnacle of getting over racism and all, just nirvana.
Yeah.
Is and but they were back-to-back presidents. Polarization may apply to the election of each of them, be involved in that. But Obama was a product of his time. Right? He represents one side, I guess, of societal process, and Trump, if you want to look at it through that lens, it's more complicated than that, the other side.
It's hard to get beneath the feelings of, someone being appealing to you or not. I mean, Obama is very appealing to me as a person, partly because he plays basketball, which I love. But I think he talks very articulately about basketball. But that's a pretty bold thing to be doing. Are you suggesting that they are sort of equally reflective, in your view, Lorna, of this polarized world that we're in now, this more polarized world, or am I putting words in your mouth? Tell me what you mean there.
I wonder if if every society, there's a force for change and there's a force for no change. Is that a way to look at these schisms universally? It does seem as though the one is representative of the force for change, the future progress, and the other, the force for perhaps homeostasis.
I think conservatives would say, conservatives, thoughtful conservatives I've talked to say, no, it's a preservation of deep values, including constitutional values that are always a threat. So, progress versus preservation, I think, is one way I've tried to think about it neutrally, seeing some of the good in both sides. I don't know if I'm a both sidism person or not. I haven't really thought about those terms that you're introducing to me, and they're interesting to me.
And of course, you're just asking me, I'd have to put more thought into it. Well, preservation, is that a euphemism for homeostasis? It's interesting.
All right, I think we've cooked up a pretty interesting conversation here, Lorna, and we're not done yet. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I just want to say a few things about what's coming up for us, and then we're going to let people go into a 10-minute breakout room. So you saw this probably if you came in early. I'm going to talk to Mariana Martinez, faculty member of the Bowen Center, who's now Vice President of Family Dynamics Consultant at Wells Fargo Private Bank, about families of wealth, in a few weeks. Very happy Mike Kerr wants to chat. I said, Mike, I'd like to have an informal conversation about your journey, and that's September 1st. We also have an event here at the Vermont Center for Family Studies coming in October, calling it Spirituality and Family Health this year. It's going to be 2 hours, 2 days on Zoom. And I want to note the guy in the center, Dr. Arnaud Delorme. Murray Bowen was interested in ESP. What's that? What's the relationship between ESP and the togetherness force? Is ESP a fact? Seems like Bowen thought it was. Well, Delorme's an ESP researcher. He's done empirical work on ESP, and I'm looking forward to learning more from him, as well as some of the other people on this display. And I want to just mention before we go out into a break how much I appreciate those who support what we're doing here. There's a lot of volunteer energy that goes into what we're doing to strengthen families. Dave Galloway, one of them, I think Dave's on here, and I love his quote: "The reason I chose to support this program is simple. I value the information that I get access to. I always come away with new perspectives and learnings, and some of the speakers I would rarely, if ever, get a chance to hear. I believe the world needs more systems thinking, so I choose to support programs like this that are making it happen." Thank you, Dave, for saying that. We do try to keep our prices for everything we do really low, and we can only do that through the support of donors. So going into the breakout, really, I just invite you to consider these very simple questions. I think it'll be a lively conversation. And here's some suggestions for the 10 minutes, or it might be 9 minutes I'm going to give you. Just let you read those. And Lorna, you know what? Some of you are going to be lucky enough to get into one with Lorna. So here we go. I'm going to use the functionality of Zoom to create breakout rooms now. For our 38 participants, there'll be about three of you, and 3 or 4 each. All right, see you soon.
Eric, you're muted.
Oh, I just said hi, Joe.
Okay.
All right, coming on back. I heard some moments of interesting discussion, and I'm looking forward to using our last 15 minutes to talk with Lorna. Before I do that, I want to just tell you a few more things here about what we're doing. So this is a really great place, our professional training program, to explore these kinds of ideas and practices and ways of thinking in one's own family and in one's work. We have very rich conversations in our professional training program about these topics, interesting presentations. I think it's a community of practice that's really working. If you want to know more about it, you can find out about it on the web. And we also have, I think, one more scholarship available for employees of a nonprofit organization. That's thanks to the sponsor of this program, Pomerleau Real Estate. So if you're interested in that, if you're working in a nonprofit organization, let us know. Here's a slide that just tells you the skinny on our program, our training program. We welcome questions about this program and referrals. And I also want to mention that I think this was an exceptional meeting. Matt Dickinson and Kim Ziegelman were very, there's a lot of wisdom there. And if you want to check it out, it's $95. You can support us and listen to a very interesting conversation from a national presidential scholar on the topic of polarization. Finally, I have another show for my business called LeaderSite, and I'm going to be interviewing a very interesting CEO, Mary Powell. If you want to know more about that, you can just reach out to me. So with that said, Lorna, how was your discussion? You're muted.
It was a thought-provoking, and it was nice to talk with people that I either just met or haven't spoken with before. That was nice. And yeah, it was a nice exchange of thinking. I think what came out was an understanding that these forces are within each of us, of reactivity, of on some level, all the things our former president has been accused of.
Wow, a little bit of Trump in each of us. So if you want to get into the conversation, you could get in the chat and ask a question. You could use the raise hands function in Zoom. There's so many people on this call that I think if you just raise your hand like this, I might miss it, but you could try. Let's, I welcome questions, thoughtful questions for Lorna, or comments if any of you would like to make it. Let's make it a conversation for 10 minutes. Okay, Dave Galloway.
Thank you for this, Lorna. I have a copy of the journal. I'm going to read it later this week. We have a long weekend here in Canada, so thank you. The thought that you've raised for me is that if I think that even if I think of Trump as a symptom, which I do, you know, am I kind of part of the problem to the degree that I don't define myself strongly enough against what I, you know, don't like, as it were, because I think there are huge implications. I mentioned it in our group, like the implications are so large here. If the US had been as successful as British Columbia in dealing with COVID, and British Columbia has not been perfect, the US would have around 115,000 deaths instead of 600,000. So leadership makes a difference. And my question for me is like, maybe I should have been doing a lot more on just defining what I think, right? And putting it out there instead of just turning off the news and doing something else. Your thoughts on, do I have to define myself, you know, as strongly as the other people may be impinging?
So, but the challenge, Dr. Bowen talked about, not in the anti-position.
Right.
The risk of that.
Right. So if I think we should be doing things to prevent COVID spreading, that's not necessarily anti, it's just what I think should be done. Yeah, okay. Should have done more.
Lorna, what's differentiation in the face of villainy?
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I don't know if I want to, but I think that's in a way what Dave's asking, and a puzzle for all of us. You know, it's the what about Hitler question. Let me invite Michael Cook in. Michael, welcome.
Oh, so yes. You drop the Hitler question and then move on.
Yes, exactly. That's the way I like to do it. Dive bombing. Okay. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh yeah, I was just curious. We had a conversation in our group, and we were just talking about the ideal of polarization. And I made the comment about that polarization has always been a part of American society. It's nothing new. And I named some, you know, incidents of slavery, of the women's movement, of civil rights, and so forth and so on. And the question becomes, there was a response that polarization then, in those instances, were about issues, and polarization now seems to be about a person. And I'd just like to get your thoughts on that, because I believe that the polarization, if it represents issue or persons, it still goes back to some unresolved stuff in one's family of origin that they're drawn to a particular side or a particular issue.
I think you introduced something important right at the end there. And you know, what is the polarization? What is the content?
Yeah.
Even at times throughout this country's history where, of course, there have been these underlying polarizations, are there times when the process is less extreme and times when the process is more extreme? You know, and what are the conditions around that? I'm trying to plug that into all the years of slavery. Gosh, I'm just not sure how it would apply, but boy, that sure was about allocation of resources.
And Lorna, do you have a working? Ron, do you have a working definition of polarization?
I think that I said it earlier, that reciprocal reactivity in escalating cycles.
Thank you. Caroline Sprigg, would you like to get in on this?
Yes, I would. So my own internal process around the last 6 years of experiencing myself as getting really hooked by this political situation and realizing through work on my own that what was really hooking me was my view of myself as a protector, something that I was in my family of origin. And that is what's drawn me to being a therapist and recognize. And as soon as I was able to recognize that that was something that I saw, and that's what was hooking me into the experiences of other people, and drove me to be just, drove me to really kind of get into that polarization of just being really emotional about what was happening. But when I was able to kind of see that I was playing that role, allowed me to take a step back and sort of say, okay, that's not a job that you have to do. And then as I was mentioning in our small group, I was listening to a discussion with an epidemiologist yesterday talking about mandatory vaccination and the idea that if you've got a group of people who are ready to go take a vaccine, you've got a group of people who are kind of worried about it on the fence, and you've got a group of people who are hardcore, we're not doing that. And that if you sort of step in there and say, you're getting it, not that we can do that, but you're getting it, you are in that process, you are hardening people, you are entrenching people because you're creating resistance. And so, and then you've got this fight happening. So that's when we talk about it going back to family of origin, that kind of got me. I think that's really true.
Thank you, Caroline. Lorna, what do you think?
Well, I really like that thinking, that the way one approaches the societal process may be a reflection of or a replication of one's position in the family of origin, the primary triangle. And that's worth thinking about and paying attention to. Yeah, I like that.
Lorna, is there a public figure or a voice out there in the media who you think is doing a pretty good job of representing differentiation amidst this sort of thing?
Without getting partisan about this, what I see is our current president. His stated objective is bipartisanship, to tone down the reactivity, and he is staying the course that he has set and not reacting to those slings and arrows from either side, actually. Yeah.
I want to mention a podcast called Hidden Brain, and it's a good neuroscience podcast, and they did an episode called Screaming into the Void. If you're interested in this topic, Screaming into the Void is an excellent episode. I also want to quickly share another poll, and we may have time for one more question for Lorna if somebody's itching. But this one's just a one question, and it's about what you might be interested in us offering. So the first option is more free discussions like this. The next three would be something you had to contribute, you had to pay for. And then the last one would be a meeting like this that's almost just, I would facilitate a dialogue for the whole hour. So if you would just take a minute to give us some information about what's interesting to you, you'll help us out. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to take a picture of this and show you what you said. Why am I not shocked that everyone liked the free option? And the structured discussion, interestingly. I like the discussion group series. It's something we've been pondering, and I think we'll keep pondering something like 4 meetings, a little bit more time, and a way to structure the conversation, and maybe practice the ever challenging art of differentiation of self when dealing with complex issues. Does someone else have a hand up or would like to make a comment here in our final moments? I'm just noticing the time, which I want to respect your time. So, hey, Lorna, thank you for stepping into this. The book review was a contribution that will live on. The journal is important, folks. Even if you don't like to read it that much, subscribe to it, please, because it's a place where disciplined thinkers are supported. And it's a very well done. Bob Noon, the editor, is a wonderful person and scholar. And just support it. Sign up for it at the Bowen Center. It's easier to do now. It's much easier to read now, all by PDF and easier to renew. And just want to thank you all for coming and being a part of the conversation. I hope to see you again here with Mariana Martinez and future things we're going to keep doing on polarization. I'm just going to end with that quote I sent to my client. Our family lives are rivers we pretend to control, leading always to an ocean of opportunity to love. See you soon. Bye.